There are things in life no amount of money can buy, but we only realize that after we've already hurt the ones who loved us the most. I didn't have golden wrapping paper or an expensive gift, just an old watch and a lifetime of stories inside it. She laughed, right there in front of everyone. With her eyes, she called me outdated. In that instant, I saw betrayal dressed in vanity, but I didn't shout. I didn't fight back. I just smiled, because what she didn't know was that this cheap gift carried something worth more than any jewel: time, sacrifice, and legacy. And when she finally discovered what was really hidden in that gesture, no party, makeup, or pride could hold the mask in place. But before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who should have been thanking you? Have you ever felt that lump in your throat? If yes, then this story is yours too. Stay with me until the end, because the ending is the answer many parents dream of giving, but few have the courage to deliver. You never forget the sound of your own daughter's laugh when that laugh is against you. And it wasn't just any laugh. It was the kind that cuts deeper than a slap, because it comes wrapped in irony, echoing in a room full of people who were supposed to respect you. It was Sophia's birthday, my daughter. I walked into the hall holding a box in my hands, wrapped in plain paper, folded neatly. The bow was made of recycled ribbon, not some shiny decoration from a fancy store. And inside, an old watch, mine, restored by me, with every hour of love a father could put into a gift. And what did I get in return? A laugh. Cold, cruel, humiliating. She turned to everyone and said, "Looks like something from a thrift store." And she laughed, and they laughed with her. In that moment, I realized something you may have felt too. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't come from harsh words or open fights. It comes from indifference, from emotional blindness, from the way someone in your own family looks at you like you're invisible, outdated, unnecessary. The party was full of glitter, mirrors, French catering, and waiters in white gloves. But no one there saw what was behind that wrapping paper. They only saw the surface, a plain box, an old watch, an old father. But that watch, oh, that watch held more history than any piece of art hanging on those drywall walls. Do you know what's most cruel about public humiliation? It's not what's said, it's what isn't said. It's the silence of people watching and doing nothing, the look of those who stay quiet out of convenience. I saw it in Ethan's eyes, my son-in-law. I saw it in the forced smiles of Sophia's friends. I even saw it in the waiter who lowered his eyes when he saw me standing there. Betrayal, in moments like this, becomes collective, and worse, it's silent, because no one needs to raise their voice to make you feel like you no longer belong. I felt as if the ground disappeared beneath me, but even so, I stayed firm, because dignity is that, standing tall even when the world tries to erase you. Have you ever brought a simple gift to someone and been judged for it? Tried to show love in a humble way, only to be treated like you committed a crime? I have, and it wasn't the first time, but this one hurt more, because it was my daughter, because it carried the weight of a lifetime of hard work, sleepless nights, back pain, and calloused hands. All of that handed over in that little box. And she laughed like she was laughing at a stranger, laughed like she never saw the man who scrubbed grease off his hands just to hold her little hand with tenderness. This kind of humiliation doesn't heal easily, because it's not just pride that's hurt, it's your soul, your sense of identity. And no matter how much you try to tell yourself, it's just a gift, the truth is that every father puts pieces of himself into each gesture. And when that gesture is ridiculed, it feels like betrayal, as if every sacrifice had been for nothing. In that moment, I realized something painful. Sometimes, the ones we love the most will never understand how much we bled for them. But I didn't say a word. And maybe you're wondering why. Why didn't I shout? Why didn't I defend myself? Because I've learned, through time and through many wounds, that there's tremendous power in silence. That sometimes the greatest revenge is not to react, to let the weight of humiliation return eventually to those who caused it. And in that hall, with crystal chandeliers and champagne being poured, I stayed silent, because I knew that time has a way of revealing who's who, and time collects its debts. But more than that, it teaches. And I knew that day wasn't the end. That party wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning. Don't think it's easy to swallow something like that. It's not. You want to disappear, to scream, to pay back in the same coin. But I chose not to be a prisoner of anger. I chose not to stoop to arrogance, because when you face something like this, you only have two choices. Either you let the pain turn you to stone, or you turn the pain into a lesson and build a bridge. And I chose to build a bridge, even wounded, even humiliated, because if there's one thing I've learned as a father, as a veteran, as a man, it's that dignity is non-negotiable, and no humiliation has enough power to erase a lifetime of respect, struggle, and true love. The curious part, at that very moment, no one knew I still had something much bigger hidden, something that couldn't fit in any box. Because while she laughed at what she thought was a cheap watch, the real gift hadn't been revealed yet, and that's the beauty of life. Sometimes you need to be wounded for the truth to find space to bloom. But that you'll only understand at the next dinner, because 2 days later something happened, something that completely changed the way she saw me, and it would change forever the course of our story. If you had met me years ago, you'd have seen me in grease-stained overalls, a wrench in my pocket, and a battered thermos of cold coffee on the workbench. My name is Thomas. I served this country as a soldier for nearly a decade, and when I came back, with aching shoulders and a mind full of memories too heavy to put into words, I traded my rifle for a lug wrench. I opened a modest garage on the edge of a town. It wasn't a palace, but it was my trench. Every car I fixed carried a piece of my dignity, and even with calloused hands, I never let my daughter, Sophia, go without. Sophia was my world. Since she was little, she had a sparkle in her eyes that made even the most exhausting days lighter. I worked hard in that garage, but the moment she ran to me at the door with a drawing in her hand, everything made sense. She grew up among tires and tools, but with time, she drifted away from simplicity. She went to a private college, one I worked myself to the bone to afford, met people from another world, fell in love with everything that glittered, and eventually with Ethan, a well-dressed young man, son of a local businessman. He had the trained smile, the expensive cologne, the kind who walks into a room and makes it seem like the room belongs to him. They married quickly. The wedding was big, bigger than I could afford, but I paid what I could, and what I couldn't, I covered with sweat and loans. Because she was my daughter, because I still believed all that love would someday come back as gratitude. But life sometimes teaches by absence. After the wedding, contact faded, visits grew rare, phone calls shorter, and every time I went to their house, I saw it in Sophia's eyes, that subtle discomfort with my simple ways, my worn-out clothes, my old car. It stung, but I pretended not to notice. Pretending became my way of staying close. Ethan never insulted me directly. That wasn't his style. His was more subtle, smiling while slipping in comments that, if you weren't paying attention, might sound harmless. Still wearing that old watch, huh, Pops? Or, oh, you brought wine, homemade. Always with that tone. Half sarcasm, half condescension. I noticed, but I didn't react. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because that's how I was raised. Respect above all else, even when the other side doesn't give half of it back. And the truth is, with time, I began to see. It wasn't just Ethan who thought I was outdated. Sophia started to see me as an anchor holding her back. I became the kind of father remembered only on holidays. And even then, it was usually out of obligation. Impersonal gifts, generic messages, rushed hugs. Her house was modern, filled with screens, voice commands, custom furniture. But something was missing. Memory, tradition, looking someone in the eyes, family. And every time I walked in, it felt like a piece of the past walked in with me, unwanted. I was the reminder of where she came from, and she no longer wanted to remember that. This betrayal wasn't loud. It was silent. She didn't kick me out, but in every possible way, she made it clear that my world no longer belonged in hers. Being a widower shaped all of this too. Losing my wife made me more introspective, more attentive to small details. I learned to cook the basics, to fix what broke around the house, to talk to myself in silence. But nothing replaces the absence of someone who knew you just by looking at you. And with Sophia drifting away, I found myself alone on many Sundays. Music playing on the radio, a photo of her as a little girl framed on the shelf. And I'd ask myself, when did I stop being her hero? At what bend in life did she trade gratitude for shame? Sometimes you don't see the break happen. You only realize when it's already a canyon. And you, listening to me now, maybe you've felt something similar. Maybe you have someone in your life who, in chasing status, forgot their roots. Or maybe you've felt small for not shining as brightly as others. But let me tell you something. Shine doesn't equal value. Glitter isn't the same as substance. In family, what sustains us isn't luxury, it's affection. It's a father's sweaty hug at the end of the day. It's grandma's old recipe notebook. It's a phone call for no reason at all. And it was by forgetting this that Sophia began treating me like a footnote in her story. But what she didn't know is that every tree that grows too tall without respecting its roots eventually feels the weight of its own trunk. And every arrogance fed by appearances will one day be challenged by truths that can't be bought. and that you'll begin to understand once I tell you the origin of that watch. Do you remember that watch Sophia laughed at in front of everyone? The one she called thrift store junk? The truth is, that watch saw more of my life than any living person. It was on my wrist the first time I stepped outside this country, not for tourism, but in uniform, with fear on my back and my daughter's absence tattooed on my chest. That watch was how I counted the days, the hours, the minutes until I came home. It was my ritual. Every night before bed, I'd wind it slowly and whisper to myself, one less day away from her. That's what kept me standing. When I came back, heavier in body, weary in soul, the watch stayed in its box for a while. But later, when I opened my garage, I put it back on. No longer as a war relic, but as a daily reminder that time was still moving, and I had a new mission, to give my daughter a dignified life. That same watch marked my work shifts. I'd clock the start and end of the day with it. I knew if I worked just 2 more hours a day, I could cover her private school tuition. So I set the time and went. No complaints, no breaks for tears. For years, it was my silent partner. And every time someone said, "A father does what he can," I answered inside, "A father does even what he can't." And I did. I went beyond. For me, time wasn't just a hand turning. It was a promise, a way of loving, because every second in that garage, drenched in sweat, was a brick in the foundation of her future. I fixed cars in 100-degree heat while sick with back pain. I missed birthdays, slept in the garage, ate cold leftovers, but I never missed a bill. I never let milk run out, never let her lack clean clothes or school supplies. All of that measured by that damned watch. But the hardest part isn't the sacrifice. It's the forgetting. It's realizing that with time, everything you did was erased, as if it never mattered. And when you bring back a symbol of that history, the answer is mocking laughter. That cuts in a way you can't put into words, because it's like they're saying, what you lived doesn't matter. What you did doesn't count. That's when you realize the problem wasn't the gift. It was the lack of memory, the betrayal of history itself, the absence of gratitude, the humiliation of seeing everything that shaped you reduced to scrap in the eyes of someone who only values the new. But let me tell you something I learned from life and from that watch. Memory may be fragile, but truth isn't. Truth waits. It survives time. It beats. And it returns. It may take long, it may hurt, but one day it finds the eyes that need to see it. In this case, what Sophia didn't see in that object was the emotional education she lacked, the family bond she ignored in favor of appearances. That watch was, at its core, the summary of who I was, what I did, and what I still am. But how can you expect someone who's never had calluses on their hands to understand the value of sweat? It's easy to laugh at the old, at the used, at the worn. It's easy to mock scars when you've never had to fight for anything. The problem is, society often teaches more about status than respect, more about display than essence. And so we raise children who know how to match clothes, but not how to recognize a gesture of love, who know how to invest in real estate funds, but not how to sit in silence with their father, who know everything about economics, except emotional economy, except the value of time given, time sacrificed, time offered in love. You might be thinking, but Thomas, she's an adult now. Maybe she just didn't understand the context. Maybe. But the problem isn't not understanding. It's not caring. When someone cares, they ask. They show interest. They touch. They feel. They ask, "Dad, why did you choose this watch?" And then the story would have been told. The symbolism revealed. The emotion brought to life. But she didn't ask, because she didn't want to know. Because at that moment, keeping up appearances mattered more to her than knowing the essence. And to me, that was the greatest betrayal. The betrayal of curiosity, of sensitivity, of empathy. That's when I realized that gift, as simple as it was a test. A silent test that life placed between us to see how far her ability went to recognize what truly matters. And she failed. She failed because she chose to laugh instead of feel. She failed because she preferred to humiliate rather than ask. But time has a curious way of teaching, and 2 days later, it would be time itself that set everything straight. Because that watch, old as it was, still worked. And what it would mark that night would be impossible to forget. Is there anything more painful than a cruel word? Yes, a cruel word spoken at the wrong place, in front of the wrong people, at exactly the wrong time. And that's what happened at that birthday. The wound didn't come from Sophia's laugh, though that had already ripped the ground from under me. The wound came seconds later, when Ethan, my son-in-law, holding a champagne flute, looked at the box with that theatrical expression of disdain and said the words that cut me to the bone. Sophia deserves jewelry, not this piece of junk. He said it smiling, laughing, as if it were funny, as if I were some clown handing over scrap metal. That phrase froze the room, but nobody said a word. They just kept smiling, as if the comment were normal. I stood there, still holding the box. I didn't fire back. I didn't argue. I swallowed hard, because in that moment, I realized the problem wasn't just the lack of respect, it was the total absence of empathy. He had no idea what that object meant, and worse, he didn't want to know. That wasn't just a mean comment. It was a veiled declaration of war against everything I represented, against my story, against my dignity, and deep down, against the very idea of family. Have you ever been in a place where it felt like everyone spoke a language you couldn't understand? Where, even in silence, you felt pushed out? That's how I felt. Ethan was the portrait of the world Sophia chose to live in. A world where appearance mattered more than essence. Where education meant etiquette, not values. He didn't grow up washing dishes with bar soap or helping his dad replace roof shingles on a Sunday. He didn't know what it was to stretch a month on rice, eggs, and hope. To him, that watch was just junk. And once again, what hurt wasn't the criticism of the object. It was the humiliation behind it, like a knife hidden in a smile. And the worst part? Sophia said nothing. She just laughed with him. Laughed like she agreed, like she approved, like she signed her name at the bottom. And that tore me more than any scream could have. Because when someone you love watches you being diminished and chooses not to defend you, that's a silent betrayal, a cold knife in the back. I didn't expect her to hug me or to shout at Ethan, but I did expect at least, "Dad, this watch is important to me," or even just a look of respect. But no, she stayed silent, and in that silence, between champagne flutes and pats on the back, the first wound that truly bled was born. It's not every day you witness the exact moment when you begin to drift away from someone. Sometimes it comes slowly, in unanswered texts, in visits that no longer happen, in automatic excuses. But that birthday, that cut was visible, concrete, like a line drawn in the ground. On one side, her new world. On the other, me, the father who was only acceptable so long as he didn't embarrass her, so long as he didn't clash with the decor, so long as he didn't remind her where she came from. And all of it over a watch. But the truth is, the watch was only the spark. The crack was already there. That night just made it split open. It's strange how we romanticize family. We think blood automatically means bond. But in practice, what sustains family is mutual respect, emotional maturity, the ability to step into the other's shoes. And in that moment, I realized my relationship with Sophia was no longer father-daughter. It was two worlds that no longer recognized each other. Humiliation became the language. Coldness became the protocol. Silence became the rule. And for me, that was the clearest sign. Something had to change. Not out of revenge, but out of liberation. Because staying there, surviving on crumbs of respect, would be the same as giving up my own dignity. Maybe you're thinking, "But Thomas, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you clap back?" The truth is, sometimes the best argument is time. The best response is example. And the sharpest revenge is living with so much dignity that it becomes a mirror, forcing the other to see what they lost. I knew Ethan's words would come back around. I didn't know how or when, but I knew. Because life has a way of balancing the books. And in that moment, even wounded, I looked at them calmly. Because something inside me was already decided. And what came next, nobody there could have imagined. That night, after everything, I drove home in silence. Didn't even turn on the radio. I let the sound of the engine and the echo of humiliation keep me company. The box with the watch sat on the passenger seat, still carrying Sophia's fingerprints. I glanced at it and wondered, where did I go wrong? Did I lean too hard into simplicity? Was I naive to believe love would be enough? Or maybe the time I thought I was investing in her, she saw as absence. The kind of betrayal that comes from indifference corrodes you in silence, like rust eating away at the corner of a weary soul. I opened the gate slowly, as if not to wake the neighbors, but deep down, it was like I didn't want to wake myself. I set the box on the kitchen counter, then sat in the armchair in the living room, the one that used to belong to my wife, and I stayed there. No TV, no lights, just me and my thoughts. And when silence settles in, it brings with it truths you've been avoiding for years. I remembered all the nights I came home from the garage smelling of grease, hands trembling from exhaustion, yet still found strength to cook her dinner, check her homework, tell the same bedtime story for the 10th time. Memory, in moments like this, becomes a double-edged sword. On one side, it comforts. On the other, it cuts. I remembered the first gift I ever bought Sophia, a doll she had stared at in a store window for nearly 15 minutes. I saved coins for 2 months to buy it, and when I gave it to her, she hugged me like I had brought her the world. And now, all these years later, I gave her a gift with infinitely more history, and what I got back was laughter laced with contempt. That made me realize just how much time can change people, and worse, how much people can stop seeing what time has built. I thought about my wife too. Oh, if only she were here. She was the balance of our home. She had a wisdom I could never replicate. She knew when to speak and when to stay silent. More than that, she knew how to look into your eyes and see beyond words. I asked myself what she would say if she saw our daughter treating her own father like some inconvenient stranger. Maybe she would have said, "She'll understand one day." But maybe she would have also said, "It's not all her fault. It's the world you let into her life." And I sat there without answers, feeling that somehow I had missed the turning point, the point where you teach the value of things, not their price. But even if I failed at times, I know one thing for sure. Love never lacked. Presence never lacked. Effort never lacked. And that's where indignation turns into reflection. Because you start realizing there's a limit between giving everything and being valued. There's a fine line between protecting and allowing someone to grow with a sense of gratitude. I wish I had taught her that respect isn't about agreeing with everything, but about recognizing someone else's path. That dignity doesn't depend on luxury, but on truth. Maybe I failed to say those words out loud. Maybe I believed that silent love would be enough. That night, while I replayed every detail of the party in my mind, I realized the deepest wound wasn't the public humiliation. It was the absence of emotional memory. It was realizing that to her, all the time I had dedicated seemed invisible, that the same oil-stained hands that once held her as a baby now brought her shame. And, my friend, that's when you understand. Vanity's betrayal is one of the hardest to heal, because it doesn't cut with a knife. It cuts with silence, with indifference, with averted eyes, hollow smiles, and the absence of one sincere question. "Dad, how are you?" Maybe you've felt it too. That sense that everything you gave was forgotten, that your story was reduced to a footnote in someone else's life, that the lessons you tried to pass on were treated as unnecessary luxuries. And if you've been there, then you know. No revenge can bring true relief, but something else can bring liberation, clarity, the clarity that your pain doesn't define you, that your dignity doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition, that your worth remains, even if nobody applauds. And with that thought, I stood up from the armchair that night, walked over to the watchbox, and decided the real gift was still to come. This kind of pain, sharp as it may be, can turn into a seed. And there, in that dim kitchen, with the smell of stale coffee and bitter memories, I began to sketch a plan, not of revenge, but of restoration, of restoring values. Because sometimes the only way someone learns is by feeling the weight of their own mistake. And I knew it wouldn't be a sermon that made her understand. It would be an act, a gesture, something undeniable. That's when the idea of the dinner began to take shape. A simple dinner, but filled with purpose. A moment where time, the very time she had dismissed, would reveal its true face. 2 days after the party, the watchbox was still on the counter, untouched. Like a cruel reminder of the night betrayal dressed itself in laughter. But something in me had already shifted. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. And with it came the decision. It was time to show what was behind the scrap metal they mocked. But this time, there would be no audience, no spotlight, no fancy decorations, not a banquet hall with music and champagne. This time, it would be at my house, at my wooden table, 2 chairs, the soft yellow light of my kitchen, and something neither of them expected, the real gift. That morning, I called Sophia with a calm voice. I invited her and Ethan to dinner, told them it was important. I didn't beg. I didn't explain. I just invited. On the other end, silence. Then finally, "All right, we'll come." They arrived on time, which surprised me. Ethan still in his sharp blazer, Swiss watch on his wrist, that same heavy cologne. Sophia in a modest dress, no heavy makeup, but still with that distant air. I greeted them with a light smile. No hostility, just presence. They had no idea they were about to be part of the most important moment of their lives with me. The table was set simply: rice, beans, and pot roast. Real food, the kind that sustains, the kind she grew up eating. I served the plates, kept the conversation light. We didn't say much. The dinner was calm, but the atmosphere was heavy. I could see it in their eyes. Expectation. They knew I had a reason for being so calm, and I did. When I finished my plate, I stood up, went to the fro cabinet, and pulled out a brown envelope. I set it on the table, between them, and said only, "Now this is the gift." Ethan's eyes lit up, though he tried to hide it. Sophia looked confused, hesitant. She reached for the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside, 3 documents. The first, the deed to a property valued at over $1 million. The second, the official contract transferring ownership of my garage. And the third, a letter, handwritten by me. I stayed silent while she read. Her hands began to tremble. Her breathing grew unsteady. Ethan snatched the papers, scanning them fast as if looking for a hidden clause. But there was no trick, only truth. There it was. Everything I had spent a lifetime building, now in my daughter's hands. When she finished reading, she looked at me in shock. She couldn't speak. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "But why? After what happened at the party?" His words trailed off. That's when I spoke. Not with anger, not with arrogance, only truth. Because what I built wasn't for me. It was for her. The garage, the property, every dollar was earned with the time I gave, the time I sacrificed, the same time that watch represented, the same time she dismissed. But I've learned something. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without letting it define you. And tonight, I want you to know, the real gift was never the watch. It was what it symbolized. Sophia wept in silence. Ethan looked stripped of his confidence. The man always so articulate now seemed small, sitting in that simple chair in my kitchen. And there I was, flannel shirt, worn jeans, hands scarred by years of work, but for the first time in a long time, whole. Because in that gesture, I was free. Free from the need for recognition. Free from waiting for gratitude, free from emotional dependence. The revenge that many would have expected didn't come as punishment. It came as unexpected generosity, and for that reason, it carried even more weight. You see, some believe revenge must be harsh, that to teach, you must wound. But I've learned something different. Sometimes, the most powerful way to return humiliation is with dignity, and even more, with a silent lesson. Because inside that envelope weren't just properties. Inside were values, the education she had forgotten, the respect not taught at her gala dinners. Inside was proof that a father's love carries no label, no brand, but it does have roots. And those roots, even when mistreated, if cared for, bloom again. Emotion filled the room, and for a moment, everything fell silent. But not the heavy silence from 2 nights earlier. This was a reflective silence, the kind that lays the ground for change. Sophia stared at the envelope as if she wasn't sure whether to hold on to it or hand it back, as if she was trying to understand when she had stopped seeing the value in what had always been there. Ethan, quiet, didn't dare say a word. Maybe he was beginning to understand that not all power comes from bank accounts, that there's another kind of inheritance, the emotional one, and that, my friend, is far harder to build. In that moment I knew something was changing, not in her, but in me, because I was no longer the father begging to be seen. I was becoming the man who shows, with steadiness and affection, what love looks like with boundaries, what respect looks like with roots, what dignity looks like with history. And while I cleared the plates and washed the dishes with the same calm as always, I noticed Sophia was still holding the envelope, but now with both hands, as if she finally understood the weight of what she held. And in that moment, without a word, she realized the watch was only the tip of the iceberg. I waited for the right moment. I didn't rush. I didn't shove emotion down anyone's throat. I let the weight of that envelope do its work. Silence. Sophia looked at the papers as if she were trying to read something beyond the ink. Ethan, quieter than I had ever seen him, began shedding the mask of superiority he wore so easily. And then, without hurry, I took the watch box again, the same one she had once called thrift store junk. I placed it on the table, beside the envelope, and I asked, with the calmest voice I could find, "Do you know what this watch represents, Sophia?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me, her eyes red and wet, but different this time. For the first time in a long while, there was truth in her gaze, not pride, not impatience, the look of someone on the edge of understanding. And that's when I told her, not a rehearsed story, a lived one. I told her about when I first bought that watch, brand new, with my first Army paycheck, how it followed me through every mission, every night watch, every sky I looked at while thinking of her as a little girl, sleeping miles away from me. I told her how I used its stopwatch to mark shift changes at the garage, and how even when I had no time for myself, I made sure there was always time for her. This watch I said, was my companion in war, in work, in fatherhood. It reminded me that every second mattered, that every minute I spent at the garage was a minute invested in your future. My voice faltered, just a little, but I kept going, because at that moment it wasn't just venting, it was legacy, it was repair, it was the lesson I had failed to put into words years earlier. I continued, every scratch on this glass is a day I went to my limit. Every crack in the leather strap is a story of perseverance. Every flaw in the mechanism is proof of time moving forward, even when I nearly broke. Sophia raised her hand to her mouth, not to stop tears, but as if to hold back the shame that threatened to spill out with her breath. Shame for the humiliation she had caused, for the betrayal she hadn't even realized she committed, for the mocking laugh that now weighed like stone in her memory. And I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it needed to be said, because some pains educate, and some truths set you free. That night in that kitchen, it wasn't just my resentment being released, it was understanding. It was a bridge, long broken, being rebuilt, one brick at a time. I told her about the night before that cursed party, how I spent hours polishing the metal with a flannel rag, cleaning every crevice with a cotton swab, as if I were handling a jewel, because to me, it was a jewel. But more than that, it was a way of saying, I remember where you came from, and I want you to remember too. But she hadn't remembered, and in that laugh was a sentence, your time doesn't matter anymore. Now though, with the property deed and garage transfer sitting on the table, the meaning of time had taken on a new layer, one even the watch couldn't measure. Ethan, who had been quiet the whole time, tried to piece together an excuse. You know, Thomas, we didn't understand. It was a misunderstanding, but I lifted my hand, not to impose, but to interrupt with dignity. You don't need to justify. You only need to understand. And that, perhaps, was the strongest lesson of that night. Because family bonds don't survive on excuses. They survive on understanding, on looking back and acknowledging the path, on looking forward with humility, and on looking at the present with respect. Respect for the time each one has given. Respect for what wasn't said, but was felt. It's strange how such a small object can carry so much. A watch, just a watch. But that night it became a symbol of my history, of my pain, of my strength, and of the love that never left, even when it wasn't understood. Because that's what separates true love from everything else. Love survives contempt. It survives betrayal, but it does not settle for it. That's why I chose to show her, not to be applauded, but to be understood. Because what hurts most in a broken family relationship isn't the absence of love. It's the absence of recognition, of gratitude, of memory. When I finished speaking, silence returned. But now it was a different silence. The silence of reflection. The silence that comes when the truth finally lands. Sophia picked up the watch, and this time she held it gently, as if it were an apology in her hands, a new beginning. And in that gesture, without words, she said everything. She said she understood. She said she felt it. She said she learned. And for me, that was enough. Because the greatest revenge in the end is seeing the other grow, knowing the pain wasn't wasted, that the seed planted with tears had borne fruit. Some lessons, as harsh as they are, don't stay inside four walls. They demand a stage, not for vanity, but for justice. And what happened days after that dinner was exactly that. One of those times when life itself arranges the characters, switches on the spotlight and says, now everyone will see. Because certain truths, when kept hidden, continue to be denied. But when they're brought into the light, they can't be ignored. It all began with a reopening party. Weeks after the dinner, Sophia and Ethan decided to hold an event to announce the new management of the garage, now under her name. I'll admit, I was caught off guard, not by the party itself but by the invitation. It arrived by text message, an elegant PDF with my name at the bottom. Guest of honor. Funny, isn't it? Me who had been a source of shame, now called honor. I laughed to myself, but I went, with no expectations. Just the curiosity of someone who knows destiny, sometimes likes to close circles exactly where they began. I arrived quietly, dress pants, a clean shirt, polished shoes. The crew, many of whom I had trained myself, greeted me with genuine hugs. It was strange seeing those same garage walls now freshly painted, with a sleek new logo, corporate banners on display. Part of me felt pride. Another part disorientation. It looked like they were putting makeup on a story that was always about sweat. But I stayed, standing, watching, until the moment of the official presentation arrived, and that's when everything changed. Sophia stepped onto a small makeshift platform. She took the microphone. With a firm but trembling voice, she began to speak. She thanked the guests. She spoke about the future, about innovation, about legacy, and then she stopped, took a deep breath, and said before everyone, "But before I continue, I need to apologize, publicly, because for a long time, I distanced myself from my roots. I laughed at what I didn't understand. I disrespected what sustained me, and I offended, in an unforgivable way, the person who loved me the most in this world, my father." The hall went silent, truly silent. The same people who were laughing seconds earlier now held their breath. She went on, "This place you're looking at today only exists because that man, standing right there, spent sleepless nights, fixing cars so I could study, so I could have clothes to wear, so I could be who I am. And when he gave me a gift, I had the audacity to laugh, to mock. And today, I understand that gift was everything I needed, and I was too blind to see it." Her eyes filled with tears. So did mine. Because there, at that microphone, it wasn't just my daughter speaking. It was a woman taking responsibility for her mistakes in front of the world. Ethan, standing beside her, lowered his head. He didn't try to interrupt, didn't try to smooth things over. He knew there was nothing left to hide. The eyes around the room turned toward me, but not with pity, with respect. At that moment, it was as if everyone finally understood that the true symbol of success wasn't in the banners, but in the scars, and in the hands that carried them. It was a moment of pure dignity, of genuine emotion, of liberation. The humiliation I had swallowed in silence was being washed away by words that, though late, carried the right weight. After her speech, Sophia stepped down from the platform and came to me. She hugged me tightly, like she did as a little girl, like she didn't want to let go. And in that embrace, I felt something heal, not erased, because some scars must remain visible, but healed. Because for true rebuilding, there must first be recognition, and she had recognized it, in front of everyone, in front of the same world that once applauded her mockery. Now they applauded her repentance. I've seen many kinds of revenge in my life, some silent, some loud, some that destroy, others that rebuild. But few are as powerful as watching arrogance collapse, not with shouting, not with violence, but with the unshakable force of truth. And that's exactly what I witnessed, right there, when Sophia for the first time stripped herself of pride. The girl who once mocked my simplicity was now crying before everyone for having forgotten her own story. And that moment was priceless. When she came down and hugged me, there was no pretense, no script. It was pure, it was real. And as much as I felt the relief of having my daughter back, I also realized that her apology, that embrace, wasn't just for me, it was for herself. Because arrogance doesn't only destroy family ties, it destroys the person from within. It eats away little by little, convincing us we're self-sufficient, that the past is disposable, that love can be replaced by status, until one day, reality hits. And that's what I saw in her eyes. A chasm between who she thought she was and who she finally understood she needed to be. Because true forgiveness only comes when someone recognizes what they lost. And at that moment, Sophia understood. She had lost years by my side, trading affection for appearances. She had traded the memory of family Sundays for the silence of formal dinners. She had traded gratitude for pride, a father for a social pedestal she thought she needed. But in that embrace, without a single word, she gave it all back, and I accepted it. Because a father's love is like that. It hurts, but it doesn't seek cruel revenge. As for Ethan, well, Ethan didn't hug me. He stood still, hands clasped in front of him, eyes fixed on the floor. That's when I understood. His downfall wouldn't come with words. It would come with the weight of what he couldn't carry. The man who always had a speech ready now stood mute, not from shyness, but from shame. Because public humiliation is strong, but nothing unsettles a man more than realizing he's lost the respect of the one he thought he could manipulate. And when Sophia acknowledged me before everyone, she exposed his lack of character too, without even mentioning his name. Truth, when it comes to light, doesn't need effort. It reveals what was hidden simply by shining. The garage, my old battle companion, now in her hands, looked like a different place. But in that instant, it became what it always was, sacred ground. Not because of the bricks, not because of the cars, but because of the history it carried. And when I saw Sophia looking around, eyes filled with tears, touching tools she once ignored as a child, I understood that the arrogance she had carried for so long had crumbled. Because pride, when built on fantasy, can't survive the touch of reality. And the reality was this: she was born there, on that cement floor covered in grease. And to deny that was to deny herself. In life, you learn that education isn't a diploma, it's posture. It's recognizing the steps that carried you to where you are. And that's what I felt that night, that the lessons I tried to give, through example and silence, were finally being understood. Not with pretty words, but with sincere gestures. And more than that, with transformation. Because true liberation isn't just forgiving someone else, it's freeing yourself from the pride that kept you from forgiveness. And Sophia, she was freeing herself right there, from arrogance, from vanity, from the illusion that success requires humiliating those who came before you. You can call it revenge if you want, but I prefer to call it emotional justice. Because in that moment, it wasn't me exposing anyone. It was her own conscience doing the work. It was time itself revealing what needed to be revealed. And all I had to do was remain steady, with the same dignity I held on to when I was humiliated. Because in the end, the one who stays standing, when everyone else turns away, becomes the pillar that holds up the change. And that change, it still wasn't finished, because what came after that embrace would change even more. We realize that something has truly changed, not when we hear an apology, but when we see action. And that's what I saw days after that tight embrace, when Sophia showed up at my house unannounced. She came alone, no makeup, no heels, no facade. On her wrist was the watch she had once called thrift store junk. And to me, that said more than any speech ever could. Because some gestures are as symbolic as they are silent. She wasn't wearing the watch as an accessory. She was wearing it as a shield, as a reminder, as a symbol of her own freedom from the arrogance that had almost destroyed our relationship. She walked into the living room, her eyes wet but not crying. She sat on the couch, looking around with the calm of someone finally seeing clearly. She simply said, "Dad, I'm trying to rebuild." And I understood. Rebuild not just the garage, not just respect, but herself. Because when we betray the ones who loved us most, the deepest wound doesn't remain in them. It stays inside us. And the cure only comes with time, with humility, with presence. She wanted to be there, not out of guilt, but out of desire. And that, to me, was already redemption. We talked for hours, laughed at old memories, looked through photos, her mother's recipes, childhood stories. Ethan wasn't there this time. And maybe that's why the conversation flowed with such ease. Sophia wasn't there as someone's wife. She was there as a daughter, as a woman, as someone who had finally understood that family relationships aren't about obligation, they're about choice. And she chose to come back. She chose to rediscover the emotional education that had been sleeping inside her. She chose to honor the father who, even in silence, had always been there. Before leaving, she hugged me again. But different from that public hug at the reopening, this one was longer, calmer, and she whispered, "I will never again laugh at who you are." That's when I knew. The transformation was real. It wasn't just an apology, it was a promise. And what comes after that is a journey of reconnection, of affection, of true respect. The kind of respect that doesn't need to be shouted, that can be seen in the eyes, in gestures, in care. Life has taught me that the greatest gift a father can give doesn't fit in a box. It's time, it's love, it's sacrifice. And when that gift is finally recognized, everything changes. That day, after closing the door behind her, I looked at the watch on my wrist, now replaced with a new one she had given me, and I smiled. Because the true gift in the end wasn't the old watch. It was seeing my daughter reclaim what she had almost lost, the value of family. How many times do we wait for recognition and get only silence? How many times do we give our very best, and what comes back is contempt, judgment, humiliation? But the truth is this: dignity is never begged for, it's maintained, even when no one recognizes it. And when you understand that, everything changes. You stop chasing applause and start living with purpose, with respect for yourself. Now tell me, have you ever been disrespected by someone in your own family? Have you ever felt your worth ignored by the very people who should have honored you? If this story touched a wound in you, then share it with me in the comments. I want to hear you, because every comment here is a voice refusing to be erased. And every subscription to this channel is proof that respect inside the family is not a luxury, it's a right. So if you believe in that, if this story made you reflect, subscribe to the channel now, turn on the notification bell, and stay close, because there are still many stories to tell, and none of them will leave your pain unanswered.